Hi, so welcome everyone back to our weekend. I just let you know we're having Kevin from Bature is having a little bit of difficulty, but we're hoping he'll join us in a few minutes. At the moment we have Jessie from Kweza, and we have Apiwe from Tolokazi, who's hiding herself there. So she's back. So hopefully Kevin will be back on in just a few moments for anybody there. So if you missed the thing, this is the second session. We had a session yesterday that was actually very informative. I was just saying backstage that I came away with more questions than I started with, because I had no clue what I was missing. I had no clue what I didn't know. And so when it was all coming to me, there's just so much there. There was so much information. It was a great chat. I really enjoyed it. But maybe today we're going to be talking about the actual craft brewing and where its position is in Africa, where it is in its kind of life cycle, I guess, what the challenges, the opportunities and things are. But if you don't mind, there is one thing out of yesterday that is going to gnaw at me the whole time, because there was one particular thing that really just grabbed hold of me. 1 second, I see Kevin's here, I think, and I'll just bring him up there. Okay.
I'll put my camera on a second. Just give me a chance. I never understand how working at a brewery is so hard to find a bottle opener.
Okay, while we're waiting for you, Kevin, to introduce you, that there is, I was just saying, there's something that Apiwe said yesterday that's kind of been gnawing away at me out of many things, but since I have the privilege of having her back, I have to ask today. There was one thing I asked you about boiling, about whether beers were boiled or unboiled, and I have one here that you said two things in it. You said that sometimes people let it sour for 2 days and then they boil. First of all, you said that it's generally boiled. And you mentioned something about letting beers sour for 2 days and then boiling it and letting it cool down. And I wasn't sure, is the souring the fermentation?
Yeah, so that would be the lactic acid fermentation. The souring.
Okay.
So what they would do, my assumption, like trying to make sense of it, is that by boiling, they're killing off all the lactic acid. Then then what we then do after the porridge is cooled down, let more water to let it thicken up a bit, loosen up a bit, and then add on either a fresh pack of grain, or also they'll add a pack of yeast, or some people will just some people would do, they would actually buy a commercial sorghum beer and add that in as a starter. So then you only have the fermentation, alcohol fermentation happening. You killed off all your lactic acid.
Okay, you leave the lactic acid. Essentially, that's the kind of spontaneous fermentation part, and then you kind of do a double fermentation, is it?
Yeah, so it's a double, yeah. Then okay. what they would, for me, the way I've kind of made sense of it is you want to fix your sour levels. So they would allow the lactic acid to do lactic acid fermentation, and then once you know that you are at the right level of souring, you then arrest that by boiling.
Okay.
Keep off the lactic acid bacteria, and then add on the only yeast that you want. That way, then you probably have a more cleaner fermentation.
Okay.
So that's the method I follow when I do. Like I did a sorghum rice. So using the natural souring that we do when we do traditional beer, allow the sorghum to stand and naturally sour, and then boil that, and then I mix that up with the mash when I was mashing in, and then did a normal like rice.
Okay.
So you got a the natural souring. So I didn't have to add like lactic acid or acidulated malt or add in a like a sour maybe a Philly sour or something like that. So that's what I tried using the natural souring from sorghum.
Okay, so that because I hadn't heard it done as part of before the boil, and then it suddenly was looking back over the video and I said, hold on, there's something that doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, because you then went on and you mentioned to me about that you've done natural fermentation, just left it go sour based on the yeast that you think is the black gas that's on the grain.
Yeah, so there's different ways of doing it. Like I said earlier on, like some people would still, because then the things with adding it later, you also run the risk of you not having much control of your level of sourness.
Okay.
That's how I think it's a different methodologies.
Yeah, no, it's the methodology. Like I said, it's like there's a whole bunch of stuff there that, like I said, when it was coming at me, there's stuff there that you think afterwards, God, I should have asked about that. I should have asked about this. I should have got more clarity. But no, so that's it. That was one that particularly stuck out at me. So okay, so now that we've that out of the way, maybe maybe we'll just talk about where brewing. I suppose I'm always hesitant about the word craft because it's what's craft brewing, what's not craft brewing, and all that thing. But kind of independent brewing maybe is a good word. But where does that's quite new in Africa, as far as I gather. That mainly it's been divided into kind of the traditional small brewers, and mainly then the commercial was the big Heinekens, Guinnesses, ABM, InBev, and all of that. But they used to control the rest of the market, and that would primarily be lagers. Is that right?
Is that an open question?
It's an open question. Sorry, Kevin. We better explain. Yeah, everything's an open question, so don't wait for me. Ask questions of the others, and they'll ask questions of you as well, because I don't have, as it's just become apparent, I don't have all the questions prepared, and things just pop up and they fly past me. So yeah, so maybe Kevin, you have, is it the biggest, the premier craft independent brewery in Nigeria?
So Jesse, hi Jesse, good to see you again. I know we're always like running past each other, trying to make more time for each other. Good to see you. And Tolokazi, nice to meet you. Kevin from Bature here. So yeah, I mean the market is, if I was to say like what the numbers are, is 80% lager, 20% Guinness. And that 80% lager is a mix between ABI, the biggest brewer, and then Heineken. And that's pretty much the way it is. The one thing is there's not so much clear data is how much you then differentiate by brand, because that's not really open to the public to see. But I would say on the ground here, like Nigeria is probably different, bigger market, is that even the big guys are building new plants because they cannot make enough Heineken or Budweiser or mainstream beer for the public. So the lager consumption or the beer consumption is very high. They cannot make enough, and predominantly it's lager. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And that's pretty much the same in South Africa and in Rwanda as well, is it?
It's mainly lagers. But what I find interesting, if you look at the history of beer in Africa, is how, even though they're lagers, I think I would put it in inverted commas that at some point they were craft, because most of the beers have like a local story to tell. Like if you look at, for example, South Africa, Castle Lager is the main brand here. It's got stories around Charles Glass, who started this brewery back in Johannesburg during the gold mine era, and he had his wife who was helping him, and to this day, I mean, the brand celebrates his legacy as Charles Glass, as the founder of Charles Brewery. Like if you go to East Africa, you've got in Nairobi, you've got Tusker, which links to the whole story around the elephant and. If you go to in Uganda, you've got Eagle. If you go to I think Ghana, you guys have you've got Hero. So I mean, everywhere you go, what I found interesting in the continent is there is a local beer that even though it's a lager, but if you look at the story behind the brand, they usually talk to the local Serengeti lager from Serengeti, the Serengeti River. So you find this across the continent, and maybe that is just the big. I mean, companies have done good marketing, but yeah, I think it's for me. I think that's something quite unique about the continent. I found interesting.
That's really interesting for us because we were originally just doing pale ales. We have our Founders Pale Ale and our Black Gold Stout, and then we did an IPA. But since opening and expanding in Lagos, we've now done a lager because we think that the jump is quite a lot for people to move from a lager to an IPA or a pale ale. But then just really to your point there, like we've named our lager Lagos Lager to be purely to celebrate being born again in Lagos and to connect with everyone who are around. And we want our beer to be, if you're a passionate Lagosian in Lagos, Nigeria, you want to drink Lagos Lager. So as you were saying, like the local sense of it is, I think, is what differentiates us from the mainstream guys.
Yeah. So yeah, it's but just to be clear, all those brands that you're mentioning, Apiwe, they are owned by the big boys.
Yes. So those are brands that are owned by the big boys. But what you're also finding now with the craft beer market, we are, I'll say, retelling that story. Trying to find a new era. So that was the era then, and these beers, if you look at the story of the brands, they go back to like 100 years ago, 50 years ago. So they tell that story of that era. And nowadays we're starting to create our own stories, our own uniquely African stories.
And that would, yeah, I mean, that fits in with a lot of, maybe not all, but a lot of the craft around the world that we've seen, that it is all about the small producer and their story.
Yeah.
You're trying to tap into it. So does that mean, I guess the thing then is where the opportunity maybe, well, they should have done challenges first, but that means the opportunities there are around you being a local brewery, being someone local that people can kind of go to and just get their beer locally, even if it's the same beer that maybe they're getting from somewhere else, but that they might just latch onto the story.
Yeah, I really, for personally, I believe in not just the story around, like for example, with my brand Tolokazi. So Tolokazi is my clan name. So in the African culture, you'd have a surname which doesn't mean much. Your clan name is what people pay more attention to. Like if you belong to the same clan, you're practically family. So you can't intermarry. I mean, people call you by that when they show you a sign of respect. As the brewer in the villages, they called after their clan names. And for me, that's why I chose Tolokazi as a brand, because if I was 100 years ago, now me, and I had the small brewery back somewhere in some village, they will call me as a Tolokazi, like they're going to drink a Tolokazi. And for me, I want to tell that story, celebrating women in the African culture as brewers. And if you look at even my beers, I use African ingredients. I use sorghum. I use only South African hops. I use rooibos. And I find that is something that is happening across most of the craft brewers, if not all, that are starting up now. If you look at the guys in Botswana, the guys in JSN, in Rwanda, if you look at the guys that are starting up in Tanzania, Nigeria. I mean, the Nigeria Bature won, I think, the best beer. It was last year when you guys won the best beer in Africa, the African Beer Cup, which was if I remember, it was a stout or imperial stout, which was, I mean, for me, that was an amazing beer using all local ingredients. Are you finding this is happening across, and people are even in the continent taking note of these beers that we're making? And for me, South Africa, more brewers who were not really, I'd say, into it, because when craft beer started, we were following the American trends. Everyone wanted to make an IPA with Cascade, Citra, and Simcoe. Everyone wanted to make, the same that everyone is doing. But what you're finding now, the more we talk about it, the more people are becoming interested, and you're finding more brewers actually want to know more about how to brew with sorghum. How do you guys do it? Because it's something that no one really, it's there, but no one really bothered much. Jesse?
Yeah, I think that the thing that we have as craft breweries, we have two things. We have our product and we have our story. and we need to be making good products, right? Like our beer needs to be able to stand on its own. Somebody should be able to drink a Kweza beer and not know anything about us, but be like, what is this beer? How, where did this come from? I want them to kind of stop and be like, I'm not drinking, as I think Kevin and Apiwe have been mentioning, the same thing is in Rwanda as in most African countries where Diageo and AB InBev, are around. So we have Heineken and we have Skol here. So those are our two industrial breweries, and that's, the majority of, that's the beer market right now. And so we're the first licensed craft brewery in Rwanda. And, people they take a sip of the beer and they're like, oh, this is different, and we do we have a ginger beer. So this is fermented ginger, and then we have a sorghum based beer. And then we do an IPA and a stout more than anything to because, it's a lot of expats are asking for it because they know it from elsewhere. And so it's a little bit of, bringing in audiences that are looking for something they're missing while introducing something that's more localized. So how do we really feature Rwanda in our beers? And in that, like I said, like our product needs to be good, but the story is what craft beer is about. Like people are drinking it for the product, yes, but then when you start to tell a story about sorghum and how do you brew a sorghum and what's the history of brewing, like we talked about yesterday, like brewing originated with women in Mesopotamia and Egypt, and being able to bring that story back and be like, let's think about what is beer. It's a fermented beverage. It's usually fermented grain, and so what are we really talking about when we're talking about beer? And I think, Brian, like when you were saying, there was all this stuff I didn't know that I didn't know, I think that's a great stepping stone into, like, I don't know what I don't know about, say, Asian brewing or like South American brewing. And there might be whole other grains that I'm not even aware of that people can ferment and make beers. And as brewers, this is fascinating because it's, like, what else can we ferment? What other flavors are there? What other techniques are there? And as a drinker, same thing. Like, what else is out there? You can only drink so many hazy IPAs before you're like, okay, is there something, what else is out there? So I think that by diversifying the craft beer scene, around the world, it's just more interesting for drinkers. It's more interesting for brewers. It diversifies the industry, creates more stability, more interest, growth. So I think that the craft beer industry is different. We're not meeting the need of just like, I want a cheap beer and I want a lot of it. That is not what we're doing. We are making quality products that tell a story about the place, like, the ingredients we use, the process we use. So our product tells a story of the place, and our stories and our backgrounds tell a story of place. And that's not what a big commercial industry does.
Yeah, no, that fits in a lot with, I had Ammon from Eichen Tid, who you might not know. They're a small brewery in Norway, and they brew raw ales and use, they reuse their yeast and that was, and I had them on with a couple of cider makers, and the whole thing that came across out of that was the same thing. It was the brewers and that are driving any change, because they could just make a lager, but it's because the brewers are interested in changing things and experimenting and they're driving it to the consumers. And I think that's exactly what you're saying there, that the consumers won't know unless you tell them. So it says you get interested in it, you're exposing the consumers to it. So
well, I think it's also it's a two-way relationship, right? It's us bringing new things to the market, but it's also us listening to the market about what they like. And being able to say, because looking around the market here, if people really like, for example, milk is a huge beverage in Rwanda. Like when you walk down the street, there's beer bars, and then there's a milk bar next to it. And it's the same thing. It has a bar, you belly up to it and you ask for a glass of milk, and they hand you a glass of milk and you drink it. And so like, something like that, what out of that comes is like, I should be finding lactose to put into my beers, because that type of sweetness is very appealing to the Rwandan market. So, listening to what people like around, and then combining that with our knowledge of the brewing world and what we can do, I think is what creates, the right relationship between a brewery and their audience.
I mean, what's really interesting, right? We're in the same continent, but Nigeria doesn't have a fresh dairy market at all. And everyone's drinking either powdered milk or UHT milk in like very small doses. And being Scots-Irish, I love a good pint of milk myself, right? So, and I love a milk stout. But for us, like, it's, you saying that is like changing my mind. I'm like, wow, that's a totally different market. You're like totally blowing my mind right now. On the other side, like what we find is the biggest selling stout is a 7.5% stout by Guinness Foreign Extra, and the next stout, the Legend Stout by ABI, is a 6%, 6.5% stout. So we took it from that angle that there's a stout market, but the stout's really bad, so we can make a better stout by just committing to getting a good quality beer, local ingredients first, and being different and different routes. But it's exactly what Jesse's saying. Like, you're kind of looking at the market, but you're also like being adventurous yourself with the brew team and being like, okay, what if I'm going to do something different? I'm going to do something that caters to the market. How can I do it in a way that is exciting or that will inspire me and my team to do it?
Yeah. So just maybe taking a step back. So if lager, I mean, it's the same pretty much been the same everywhere for the, up to maybe 20 years ago in the States, and kind of between 10 and 5 years ago in Europe, maybe. Lager was the big one. It still is the biggest seller of all beers in the world. So is that, like, I've always been fascinated by the fact that the craft beer went completely off into the IPA side and kind of ignored lagers, because that seemed to be the big market where you're either, you could draw from that, but obviously they went the other way to try and just get the small niche of people, which is a big niche. But and now it's slowly drifting back around again, and people are starting to look at lagers and look at more traditional beers. So is that something you think the market is there for, kind of an extreme beer, or you should be going something more down like the mass market beer?
I'll go first. Personally, I South Africa. So talking of South Africa specifically and the SADC region, we are very much a lager market palette. You have like, even if you go to beer festivals, you can have your imperial stout, barrel aged, this and that, sour beers. But people will still come back and say, "Do you just have a lager? I just want to have a lager." So they will have all the other nice styles, and they'll have a taste, and they'll really, I mean, the people that are really into craft, and they'll tell you, "Oh, this is so beautiful." But they'll come back, and they still just want to have a clean lager. So what you find is that a lot of craft breweries in South Africa started off doing what we thought was missing in the market. Everyone launched an IPA. Every brewery had an IPA. People were doing barrel aged beers, sour beers, and what I found is that almost every craft brewery, if not all of them, have a lager in their stable, because you're going to come across people that are just wanting to want a lager, and at the end of the day, it's about making money. You need to sell volume to make money. So, but what I find also interesting is that the lager is not, we're not just making another lager. So craft brewers obviously now looking at, how do I make my lager a bit stand out? Like, is it the types of malts that I use? Is it the hops that I use? So that it still has that element of being craft. So that's what I found this side. I don't know about other guys.
I say we don't need to be scared, right? Like Heineken, ABI, it's very easy to make a better lager than them. Like, no joke, you can brew a better lager than them quite easily. Consistency is another thing, and like moving it around the country is another thing. So, like, you can make a good lager, the tastier, still have the full clarity, still have the crispy end that's better than the mainstream brands. So that's why I think the point is that if you can do it, you should. And the business side is another part, like what do you want to sell and how much do you want to sell? But I wouldn't be worried about the product side of having something better.
Yeah. And I'd say there's somebody who just asked a question about cooling with lagers that I think ties into my answer about lagers. And that, like, right now we're still in our R&D phase. And so we actually don't have cooling yet. We are bringing up equipment, so we would be able to do lagers. So in Rwanda, we're at about 24 degrees Celsius, kind of on an average day. And I don't have cooling. And so, what I'm looking at is just ales, but also, so part of me, when I got started, I was, everybody says you need a lager, and we probably will make one. Right now, we don't have the ability to, but what that's also brought us is the question of, lager was created to brew in a German cave, right? Like that's the origins of it. And this is not a German cave. We do not brew in a German. We are in Rwanda at 1,500 meters altitude, 25 degrees Celsius. So what is the beer that we should be making here? Like, why are we importing a German yeast to ferment at German temperatures? And when we're in Rwanda, so what is beer in Rwanda? What is the history of beer here? What yeasts are native to Rwanda, so we can maybe begin to start to brew with those that are used to the ambient temperature? Because one, that's a unique thing to this place, so hopefully we can create something unique of the place. But two, like that reduces an energy load. So also just thinking about sustainability, to your question about kind of, are we running generators? How do you do it? What is a sustainable method? How do we how do we reduce that demand in the very first place? And in a way, one of the things is an ale doesn't need quite that cooling. And so that's one of the things that I'm even considering as I, start to scale up, and we'll have, glycol chillers and can do lagers, is do we want to get into lagers? Probably have to do one for market demand, but it also is a chance to engage with people when they say, do you have a lager? And I stop and ask them, like, Rwandans have a lot of Rwandan pride. And so like, the hashtag made in Rwanda, check it out on Twitter. It's huge, the pride of making things in Rwanda. So when it really comes down to it, I'm like, if you really want a lager, go to two of the, main companies, because we are made in Rwanda, we are of Rwanda. And, do you really want a beer made with German yeast, that's made at different temperatures that we have to put extra energy into? And again, going back to, we have our product and we have our story. So when you engage your drinkers with that kind of side of things, even if they're like, I really want the lager, but now you're making me be like, should I drink the lager? So in the end, they'll want a lager, so we'll probably make one. But it's a chance to engage that conversation and be like, why do we do what we do? And are there other options out there? And also, I think just finishing out answering the question about cooling and lagers, and there are other options that you can do. We've been looking at things like ice chilling, or like you use solar power during the day to build up ice that then at night melts and uses that melting energy to actually run the cooling. And so there are different methods you can use, so that if you do have to pretend you're a German cave temperature, that's more sustainable way to do it. But that just brings up the question, why are we doing that in the first place? And are there alternate ways to do these things?
And do you think that the market is changing? I mean, I suppose I should have started with this. Like, how has the craft market grown over the past 10 years? When did the first kind of craft breweries start? And, how many are there now? I suppose something I should have asked at the start.
I think it's probably different for every market here on the call. So for us, we are the first craft brewery, but what does it mean to be the first? People have been brewing here at home or in different communities for a long time. We're just probably the first people to put that label of craft beer on ourselves. And there's another craft brewery that is a bit smaller, but they are 100% Nigerian ingredients. And as much as I respect that, having gone through the pain of trying to source local ingredients, it's really hard. So we have a sorghum-based beer. All our beers are sorghum-based, so we know that we're using local ingredients, but we know that we can't rely on the local value chain for 100% of what we do. And we're already selling more beer than we can make. So it's a bit like you're pushed and pulled between using the local ingredients and then going for something that you import to get a good quality product. And I think what Jesse said is quite interesting for us. Like, we launched Lagos Lager to celebrate being in Lagos, thinking it will be a great lager, but we didn't realize within 6 months it's going to be our #1 selling beer. Now, it's #1 selling beer. We're quite good spread across our range. Like, it's maybe 30% across 4 beers. The other beers are doing 20%, 20%. But for some reason, people either like the name or they like lagers, and we can't really get away from that. But yeah, there's 2 craft breweries in Nigeria, ourselves and some other brand called Igbadun, who are really great people. They're a lot smaller. And then there's one fake craft beer that import the beer from Spain and relabel it here as a craft beer. But there's so many spelling mistakes on the label that you wouldn't drink it.
I think no. So in South Africa, we've had South African breweries, which bought Millers and then was bought out by AB InBev. So I mean, they started off obviously as what would probably term as craft many years ago, 100+ years ago, and grew over the years. So in the 80s, early 90s, there were some breweries that wanted to start up, smaller breweries, but they couldn't crack into the market. So it was only, I'll probably say, post 94, when at the end of apartheid, when we had democracy in the country, which obviously allowed more people to participate in the economy and open up things for everyone, that we started seeing a real increase in the number of craft brewers. And it was only like 2010, 2012, we started seeing like a great growth, double-digit growth. Before COVID, we're sitting at close to 250 craft breweries across the country, and about 30% of those had to close due to COVID-19. Actually, mine included. I've also had to close down my brewery due to COVID-19. So at the moment, we are probably back to like less than 200 craft breweries in the country, but things are starting to probably, I'll say, pick up. And I think for me, the other very interesting thing, and it's something that I'm also quite vocal about, as I know Jesse knows, I am for, because in Africa we've got very distinct racial lines. So there's certain markets that are still very predominantly white. So I'm quite vocal about making sure that the industry, I mean, everyone drinks beer. Beer is not political. That we also kind of have to make sure that when it comes to manufacturing thereof, that it also crosses the racial barriers. So we're starting to see more and more Black people getting into drinking craft beer, and also getting to wanting to own their own brands, wanting to own their own breweries, which is for me very exciting going into as the industry continues to grow. That is starting to become quite diverse, and accommodative or open to everyone to participate.
And sorry, just there's a question there, but it also maybe ties in. I'll just ask you. Everyone mentioned local ingredients, and I understand that there's some sort of, in every country there is some sort of law or some legislation that on the percentage of local ingredients. And is that for like specifying things like sorghum, or is it just saying, look, local ingredients? Or
Kevin, I think you're on mute.
Thanks. For us, it's there's no legislation. It's just a commitment to the business to use as much local content as possible, and goes back to the story aspect of why we're here. We could make a pale ale or an IPA importing 100% of everything, and it'd be great. It'd be a great beer, but that's not why we're here. We're here to make as much local content as possible. I think, though, the racial thing that came up there, the racial divide, is really interesting as well. Like, I was very concerned at the beginning, like, about, I don't want to have, obviously I'm a white male in Nigeria, but I don't want to have a bar full of people who look like me and do what I do. So we are a community-owned business to an extent. So all of our employees can earn equity in the business, but also, like Bio and others, they have equity in the business as well. So very much like we should all be owning this together. which is very different from any brewery in Nigeria. But secondly, about 90%, I'd say, of our front of house, like our tap room customers, are Nigerian. And we're very proud of that because, that's our target market is, middle income Nigerians is who we're aiming for. People who want to be aspirational and want to have a very high quality drink and have a good time. And and for us, the biggest thing that we can ever do is introduce new people to good quality beer. And that's, for me, is a personal passion, is that you see someone drink their first ever IPA or their first ever pale ale or even our lager and go, wow, you can see that light in their eyes as they go, this is different. Okay, can I have one more? Or what else do you have? Like, that's where the passion is, and that's what kind of drives us and to make good quality product.
Right. Actually, I'll show this here. Just on the thing specifically about the local grain. So Amina from MacTube is asking, how easy is it to get the malted sorghum, or do you malt it yourself? Like, you're getting the ingredients, how much work do you have to do on them after you get them, basically?
I would say atrociously difficult, but I buy it pre-malted. I think Jesse has a much harder problem than me, and even I find it difficult. So
Yeah, I'd say that's one of the things that we're most focused on in terms of both opportunity and challenge, because there's a couple things at play. So we don't have a legal requirement to be required to use local ingredients. We're doing two things. One is our own value system. We really want using local ingredients, and the second part is the financial aspect. So while Rwanda does not require that we use local ingredients, if we import and we make our beer with majority imported ingredients, we pay a 60% excise tax plus 18% VAT. So 78 cents on the dollar goes to the government in taxation. And if we use local ingredients, if we put the sorghum, the excise drops to 30%. It's half. So we're then doing 48 cents to the dollar in taxes. And so the two of those drivers, both our values and economics, are making us, really look at what we're brewing with and what that. Partially, it's where are we buying our ingredients from? And again, going back to are we a German brewery making, using yeast from a German cave? We're not. We're a Rwandan brewery, so we want to be sourcing from Rwandan farmers with ingredients native to Rwanda and the farmers grow. And so the question about where do we get our malts? So if we brew with any barley malts, we do have to import that, and that comes usually from Germany, Kenya to Rwanda. But sorghum is malted by the average female farmer. So she grows her own. Oh, I think there's some feedback. I don't know if you guys are hearing that.
Let's try and.
I think.
Oh, sorry, did press the wrong button there. Yeah, maybe we'll just try and. Okay, I'll turn off everybody's audio and we can.
All right, let's see if that works. Yeah, now I'm not hearing a feedback.
I think it's got a little bit of feedback coming in yours.
So we actually source our. No, can you guys hear that? Maybe somebody else should tell a story about malting. Sorry.
Okay, so our side in South Africa, legally, we have a definition for traditional African beer, like I said yesterday, and then we also have a definition for normal, what you call clear beer. So if you make a traditional African beer using sorghum, so on the Liquor Act, it actually specify that you must use malted sorghum, millet, or any other indigenous cereals. Then you actually have a different taxation rate. So they get taxed very, very low compared to clear beer that's then fermented. And clear beer, by definition, you must have 35% malted barley. Then the law doesn't specify that other 65%. So you can add whatever else but as long as you have malted barley. So we do have farmers that do barley, and we have farmers that do sorghum also, and maize. So those are the three main cereals that we find for beer making in South Africa specifically. And sorghum, we buy it malted. So there are companies that actually will source from the farmers and malt it, and then they have it, they sell it in malted form. So the one that I use for my beers, I normally buy from the company, because in the same malted sorghum is used to make traditional beer back in the villages, and also the commercial sorghum beer.
Yeah. And
I think what's really come through, like just in the first 20 minutes of conversation, is how different everyone's market is here. Like we're all trying to make good beer, but we have very different challenges. It's almost like chalk and cheese, you know. As I said, no rules in Nigeria. It's just supply chain issues. And I buy barley on the market here. The barley is supplied to Guinness and Heineken. We're now big enough that I can buy from them as well. So we do 10 tons or 12 tons at a time. Before we were, 2 years ago, we were carrying it in suitcases, it was like literally the startup. But we just did a efficiency test last week. And we found out that our imported barley from one of our suppliers is 30% more efficient than the local barley that's here. So we've actually made the decision to we're always going to use sorghum, and sorghum makes up about between 40 to 70% of each beer. But it's actually more efficient for us to import a container of high quality malt, barley malt, than to buy what's available that the local big boys are using. And it's just our market, just the way we found that out through experiments.
Actually, coming back to the sorghum, I had a note here, and I'm going to forget it if I don't ask right now. Because Jesse, you said, like, obviously you're all using sorghum in this, but Jesse, you said that you're dealing with Yakima Chief hops, that you're coming up with some different sort of a hop blend that is specifically targeted towards using sorghum.
Yeah, we had a meeting with Yakima Chief to really talk about what is the sorghum profile, what is the flavor profile of it, and then they've developed a hops. They call it a hops bundle. So it's 3 different hop styles that have more oil to them. So they create, because so the traditional ichigaje, which is made with sorghum, kind of to your question earlier about boiling, in the Rwandan version of making traditional homebrew, there is no boiling. And so it's a very thick, very opaque beer. But the way that we make it, it becomes a clear beer. We do a double decoction mash, and it comes out a clear beer. But in that, it removes the mouthfeel. And so sorghum is very thin. And so by using different hops, we can help bring that mouthfeel back. And so we're looking at a couple different types of hops that both that have high oil, as well as kind of have a more rounded flavor to complement the sorghum instead of compete with it. Because what we found is that a lot of hops that are used on barley-based beers just really compete with the kind of semi-sweet, semi-sour flavor profile you get with sorghum. And so really creating new flavor profile, hops profiles that are specialized for sorghum, and that in the end create a delightful beer, a really nice beer. We just finished one with the new kind of hops blend, and it's delightful. But it's, that same hops put on a barley-based beer probably wouldn't, the malt would overpower it. So we're just trying to work with what we have and really showcase what it is, rather than say, it's really thin. How do we, up that using barley or doing something else? It's just like, well, this is the flavor profile of sorghum. How do we showcase that flavor profile? And it's really nice. And it's light. And, so I suspect that as we continue going along, a nice light sorghum ale is probably going to be our version of, we call it the cheese pizza. People come in for the superstar of like the IPA or their stout or something, but like what is after you've had a couple of future beers, what do you want to drink 2 or 3 of? And that's, I think Kevin mentioned, we got to pay our bills, and and Apiwe was saying, like, you have to have that big money maker. And so finding that middle of the line, easy drinking beer. And what we're really trying to do is, rather than replicate something German, what does that mean here in Rwanda? And probably for right now, we're really honing in on kind of a middle light sorghum based ale.
Right. So, but it wouldn't match, like, say, something that Kevin's doing with his part sorghum, part barley.
We actually, our beer is 80 to 90% sorghum, with a little bit of barley, partially for the enzymes, partially for mouthfeel, and partially for because we haven't started roasting our sorghum yet, and so we source all of our sorghum locally but it's made basically kind of like 10 kilo at a time by a woman on her farm, and so it widely varies. So when we source our sorghum, it's gotten to the point now where people who drink our beer regularly, they'll take 1 sip of our beer and say new batch, because they can taste the nothing else will change except for the sorghum, and because each person makes it on their farm, and it depends on where it rained when it was germinating, or what the temperature was, and so each batch is very different. So we're really looking at how do we start to work with those farmers, so that we can create more stability in that market and more consistency. We also really have to watch out for aflatoxin. It's a fungus that's very common in Africa, and it's a normal thing in nature, but when you're harvesting the different grains, it takes root in there, and it's a cancer-causing fungus. Really need to be careful about where we're sourcing our grains from and what processes that they are using. So we're really just trying to figure out how to create a steady supply chain of locally malted sorghum.
That's amazing.
Oh, go on.
That's what I say. It's amazing.
All right. Yeah, no, it sounds. I mean, but that's part of what you're doing in Kweza. You're trying to make it almost a tourist. You want to be a tourist attraction. You want to be a reason people come to Rwanda.
Well, we want to be both. That's not our target market, because really what we want to be a national pride kind of a brewery. We want Rwandans to want Kweza beer. And then, yes, we want to be able to create a demand so that we also export it, that people are like, what is this beer from Rwanda? We want some of it. And actually actually, I think I have a better thing here. Hold on. Our name, Kweza. It means to harvest. And so really a big feature is the grain that we use. And so yes, we want to be a tourist destination, but we also want to, it to be something that Rwandans are very proud of, and are, that it's made in Rwanda, that's made of Rwandan ingredients, that's made by Rwandans for Rwandans. And so really it's, about celebrating that internally, and then hopefully by making a good product and having a good story, that we start to create demand larger than Rwanda, because Rwanda itself is teeny. So we will max out our market. And so, whether we grow larger, it remains to be seen. But we really, and thank you for inviting us to this podcast, because I think it's these kind of sessions that also start to really grow what is African craft beer, and things talking about sorghum, talking about different we talked about bitter leaf yesterday and different hopping mechanisms, and so really trying to figure out or to share the kind of story of what is African craft beer. And also I made this, let's see if I can find my camera. So this is not a exhaustive diagram, but kind of when we're talking about African craft beer, it's kind of centralized in some locations. Ethiopia has a long history of craft beer, and it has really high quality and kind of a lot more breweries in South Africa. And then they're kind of starting to pop up different places. And what I find exciting is starting to talk about this stuff. There's a lot of people very interested in, being like, oh, African craft beer. I've never stopped to think, is it different? And why is it different? What's different? And so I think conversations like these are really where we can start to bring
definitely should be different.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that matches what I was saying earlier. Like, talk to other people. Everyone, whatever it was 20, 30 years ago when it kind of started exploding in America, everyone just made IPAs. And that was because it was different from what was there. But now it is slowly coming around to more traditional things like saisons and lagers and all of that. And, lambics, they're all becoming the trendy beers. People are coming around and I think, from what I understand, like the brewers are getting bored of just making the same thing every time. So you want to make something different, and that's where the market is growing, essentially. I mean, it'll probably always still be lager being 60% of the market or whatever, but there does seem to be that kind of what you were saying there, Jesse, about kind of the terroir, I guess, in wine terms, each batch being different because the weather was different. That's something that there's I don't know. I think a lot of brewers are seeing a lot of potential in.
But I think that's for us is very difficult, right? Because Nigeria is a mass consumption market, and they want consistency. And to be fair, my biggest complaint when I'm out and I get a beer that's not our own beer is like one slightly less carbonated, one slightly more malty, and people complain about that kind of thing. Whereas if you're a craft brewer and you're saying that it's different because of the season, it's quite easy to tell that message at your bar or immediate to you, but to get out to the wider public is really hard. And we're finding that now is a challenge. Now we're in our first 4 supermarket stores, and people are saying, oh, it tastes a bit different from last time. And we're like, oh yeah, because it's a different batch of sorghum, or it's a different season, whatever. So it becomes something that you realize why consistency is so prized by other craft breweries and also the bigger guys, is because people know what they want and they want the same thing again if they like it. I don't know the resolution to that. It's just a comment to say that.
No, that also makes sense because, I suppose if, like I said, if you own the bar, that's the only place you can get it. You can talk to the customers. Then their customers who are going to want to, they know you, and they, as Apiwe was saying, like there's a story behind it, and they know that, so you can explain. But if you're just going
and you can have jokes and say, this is a good batch, or even to extent, if I've got a beer that is new or it's just done, I'll say to the customers, oh, it's fresh, it just left the tanks today. And that's a great thing to tell a customer, like it's super fresh, like it is. That's our biggest selling point, is fresh, tasty beer. But that doesn't translate out into the wider world. And you can't necessarily get the bartenders at other bars who serving your beer to understand that as well, So I don't know the solution to it. I'm still trying to figure out.
So I think what is interesting in South Africa when the craft so very English word it was booming, like in the early 2000s, 2010s. We always had, there was those comments where somebody would go to a bar, get a beer that was not the freshest or was not really quality, and the comment was always, no, it's craft, it's supposed to not be consistent, it's supposed to be a bit different. And what we then saw in the last, I'll say probably in the last 5 years, we then had what we call we've got like companies that are I doubt them as a big 5. So these are guys that are doing like 5 million liters plus a year. So in the bigger scheme of things, there would be there'll be more craft, and then the other guys will be more nano breweries, or even like the other smaller guys. So what you find with these guys now, they come in, they have money to put up labs, so they're able to monitor quality from like the big breweries would do. They're able to hire fully qualified brewers because they've got the financial backing. They're able to pasteurize their product. They're able to send it across the country pasteurized. They have cold transportation, so they're like a level below the macro brewers. But they also, then the advantage they have is that they still using they're making quite fully flavored beers. They make IPAs, they make Vice beers. They make all sorts of other craft beers. So what that has then happened is that the consumer now is becoming more and more educated. Now they're getting to a point where they understand that, what, just because it's craft doesn't mean it should vary in quality. It should be consistent. And that has then now led to a layer of craft brewers in the bottom end who have those batch to batch variations, who are there was guys that were still fermenting in plastic fermenters, where you'd have contamination, no proper care to hygiene, food safety was not a big issue. So those guys are now, what we're seeing, they're starting to fall out because consumers are now deciding where they spend their money. And because now the big companies are also able to sell at a reasonable price. So that's currently some of the things that we're seeing this side of town. We are having a very, very educated a consumer who's becoming more appreciative and understanding of that just because it's craft doesn't mean it must be substandard. And that is now forcing the whole industry to everyone to pull up their socks and realize that, what, for me to survive this, I need to make sure I make good quality beer that is consistent. But we still have, even though we have these guys that are, I would say, craft mass produced and distributed across the country, we still have regional breweries who are only focused in their small town, who only sell in their small town straight from their tankers. If you want their beer, you travel for it. So we're starting to see like different dynamics as the market is getting matured.
Right. Yeah. So that makes sense. It's kind of layering, I suppose. The macro, the bigger craft breweries than the local seller. That brings up a thing, because you both mentioned there. What is your kind of sales channel? I mean, before COVID, say, like, is it mainly in bars? Is it through retail? Is it online? Like, what was it before COVID, and what is it now? Kevin, you're not muted there, so you can talk.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to hear other people's answer to this, but we designed the business plan for expansion explicitly on having a bar to fund the expansion, and it's now. It's a terrible situation to be when you're brewing 9 till 6 p.m. and you're running a bar from 6 p.m. to midnight, and then you're up at brewing at 6 a.m. the next morning. I wouldn't advise anyone to do it for their mental health. But the truth is, in some ways, cash that comes through the business helps you expand. So it was the right decision to have a bar. Our bar has it's not a fancy bar, it's a casual bar, but we have a grill and we put some live music on, and it drives revenue in that is 10 times what about 10 times what our wholesale on-trade, off-trade is. But that's like your base, right? It's like your car showroom. It's like you go there, you come, you can have 8 different beers, you can meet the brewer, you can get a tour. But in 2 years' time, I want the bar to be 10 or 20% of revenue, not 80%. We have to move from there. So I guess the decision was right to do that because it gave income to the business. It gives us a platform to explain our beers. And even if we do a batch that we're not, sorry to say, we're not super proud of, and I hope no one's listening from Nigeria here, but if we do a batch and we say, look, it's okay, but I can't be a champion for this batch, I can still sell it at a discounted price at the bar. It's like, give it the name, the brewer's friend or the brewer's mistake or whatever, and we can still sell it off. So it means we're not doing as much wastage as well. So I would say for us, immediately the bar is very key to the business, but in 2 or 3 years' time, I don't want to. In 2 or 3 years' time, I want it to be much less of the business as we grow. So that's where we sit. And we are on Victoria Island, which is like the Dublin city of Ireland, or Princess Street in Edinburgh or Oxford Street in London. We're only 2 streets away from the main drag in Lagos, so that does help us as well.
Okay. For us in South Africa, one of the biggest challenges we have is is that our liquor laws are different by province. So in some provinces, you are allowed to do a brew pub. In some provinces, you have to build in an industrial area. Therefore, it becomes very difficult for you to put up a brew pub. So the model that obviously worked, like Kevin's saying, brew pub is any brewery that, because you've got direct, your sales are yours, you don't have a middleman. So that works for people that can do that. Unfortunately for me, I'm in Johannesburg in Gauteng. My brewery was in the middle of nowhere, industrial, because it has to be deep industrial zoned. So I relied on outlets, retail. So obviously then we had COVID-19 with the alcohol bans. I think South Africa, we had the worst, where we had like full-on restrictions on distributions.
Yeah, it was really, really tough. We're looking at South Africa going, how did you guys get
Yeah,
through that? Really tough.
it was the worst time ever. So that really affected a lot of the breweries, but it also, on the positive, opened up online channels. So almost I think probably every single brewery has an online platform now, and it has also opened up. The sales online through some of the big online platforms have increased dramatically. So I think for me, that was a positive that came out of COVID, opening that channel of online, which before, I know everyone on the call knows, Africans, I do not trust easily when it comes to sharing their card details. What are you guys trying to details? So when we had that, it allowed people to trust more when it comes to online transactions, and a trend that continues to actually increase, which for me was a positive out of COVID.
Yeah, that's something I was always curious about, whether COVID, because people can't go out and that, whether they were trying more stuff at home and willing to try different beers when they were stuck at home.
No, we're not allowed to sell. So it was not just, we had restrictions on transportation of alcohol, selling, consumption. Yeah. That's where people started home brewing a lot. So what is another positive? People started home brewing. People started learning about making their own beers, which was a positive for craft beer, because people that would normally drink mass-produced beers and they could not get hold of them, now they started Google searching, how do I make my own beer? Which is actually one of the big trending questions asked on Google. How do I make my own beer? Now the question is, how do I make my own petrol?
Don't talk.
Yeah, I love being African.
Yeah, look, you're right. I just want to ask, so because I suppose there's just a couple things before we finish. You're both, like, you're exporting Apiwe. And Jesse, you said that's your ambition. So where do you see that market? Because it would seem like you have a big market to kind of address at home first, before thinking about exporting.
For me, interesting. That's part of the strategy I'm trying out with the brand. I'm sure the other guys will let you know that we Africans, we aspire to US and the Europeans. Like everything that we do all the time, it's like we look up to and we follow those trends. So for me, trying to get the export market is also trying to elevate the brand more, that it is a brand that's recognized in Europe. Therefore, as a South African, you're like, and it goes back to what Jesse was saying earlier about the pride. So people get, like, once you tell them that, but this is, people appreciate this more than you do, but it's meant to be yours and you're supposed to appreciate it more. It's kind of playing their emotions. But there is definitely a big market at home that I am working on getting. It is starting to pick up, and for me, the UK distribution did help me in terms of relaying the story that the product is now available. It's a global brand.
So it's as much a South African targeted marketing as actually selling the beer to UK.
Yeah. For me, I don't know about you guys.
The crazy part is we are being requested to sell beer and or license in a lot of different countries. at both the beer itself as well as our raw ingredients. So people are asking us to export Rwandan malted sorghum to Canada, to Sweden, to different countries, so that they can brew with Rwandan malted sorghum. And so we're looking at things about whether it's ingredient exporting, whether it's licensing our beer, or whether it's actually exporting the beer itself. And we first things first, we want to make sure that we're successful here in Rwanda. But again, it's the beer is both its own product, but also it's the vehicle to tell a larger story. And by exporting, it's not just about the business, it's about putting Rwanda on maps for things that it currently isn't on a map for. It's about because there's a lot of the discussion about Rwanda is not the two G's, the genocide and guerrillas. That's what most people globally, that's the only things they've heard about Rwanda. And Rwanda's so much more than that. And so the more that we can export products, export story, export, what is from Rwanda, the more that, the true kind of identity of who is Rwanda today gets out there. So yeah, we want to export both for financial reasons, but also for the kind of larger value-based drive that, is also why we're making beer here.
And where do you think, I suppose we'll let you go now in a minute, but so that brings around to, what the third session in this series is going to be tomorrow night with the Chicago Brewing, but it's going to be, they're talking to people in America about African influences. So where do you think, like, what coming out of what you're brewing, out of the traditions or out of the experimentation or stuff, can influence, other craft brewers around the world?
Actually, today is the launch of one beer by Paris Brewing Company in Ontario, Canada. And then next week is Two Phrase Brewing with First Sip. And they'll be releasing a beer in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And that what they're doing is they're brewing with sorghum. And so the great part is that, even though we're not exporting or anything yet, we have already started by working with our partners. They're brewing with sorghum. They are then, during their release, telling the story of brewing in Africa, telling the story of sorghum. And so I think that, some of the influence is more using beer as a vehicle again for a storytelling mechanism. Sorghum is gluten-free, so I think that it's environmentally friendly, climate resilient. So that's, while that you could consider that African influence, I think it's just diversifying grains around the world. And then think coffee, chocolate. They're originally African plants and ingredients. So I think that there's a lot of influence that isn't discussed as African, but is African. And so I think the product is out there, and now the story needs to match that and be like, remember that where brewing started, and remember that a lot of these ingredients, where do they originally come from?
Yeah. How about you, Apiwe? Do you see any particular thing in the techniques, in the traditions, or that you think someone should pick up and maybe experiment with, or kind of specifically?
I think I've got three comments on this point. But firstly, an apology, because the band is just doing a sound test outside, so you might hear some music behind. So last night we had a band from Ireland that we flew in for St. Patrick's weekend, and of course that's coming from my connections to Ireland and the Irish embassy that supported us by buying our first beers. But we had a full-on jam session with Nigerian musicians, and it was a very special moment, I think, in my life, but also I think for having the first Afrobeat and Irish Ceilidh jam that I've ever seen anywhere, and it was amazing, at the point that after all the stress of setting up the band, moving people around, I was sitting there going, wow, this is amazing. And we had Fela Kuti's music being played on the Irish tin whistle, and we had Nigerian sax playing, Whiskey in the Jar. It was superb. And the point that I would come there, it's not just about the ingredients in the beer, but it's also bringing people together over the beer and the packaging that it's in. So the biggest thing that we've probably been most renowned for right now, not only the beer, but the packaging is all done by Nigerian artists who are award-winning artists in their own right. You know, they've been in London, they've done products shows there. So it's not just about getting our beer. We do want to win a World Beer Award and my job is to put Nigeria on the map for great beer. But it's also everything that is packaged in to bring awareness of how much is going on here. So for me, it's music, art, and beer that come together into the whole experience of what West Africa is, and then putting that in people's minds as a place that is thriving with culture, with music, with great products, and not necessarily just about us. I know you mocked about techniques in brewing. I went in a totally different direction, but I think that's quite important.
Like you said, I mean, the brewing, anybody can pick up hops and just play with different hops. It's all like about what inspires you to try something different. I mean, and that sounds like it's very much what you think a large portion of what African can bring is. Obviously can bring, you can try like what Jesse's been saying with the, pure sorghum beer that has been, but it's not traditional beer, but it has a different taste. So you can do that. But at the end of the day, then people are going to have the story of the culture that kind of produced it originally. And that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, we should probably finish. I don't know if there's something I should have asked or something that I should have covered here, because I'm always very bad at this. Is there anything that you think that we should have said or should have covered, or anything that the opportunity sounds huge for craft brewing in Africa? It seems like there are some challenges, but maybe a lot of the challenges have been overcome already.
Yeah. I think two things. One is that the challenges are definitely different from traditional highly developed markets. I'm always struggling with water and power, and I talk to brewers in the UK, and they're like, "What? We're struggling for shelf space and whatever else, how to get glassware." So the challenges are different, but I think we have the same objective: is to make great beer. And the second thing, there's a lot of talk about sorghum on this call, and that's based in Guinea corn, Africa. But I would say there's a lot of space, as Jesse said, coffee, cocoa, groundnuts, which are more commonly known as peanuts. So groundnuts, and then even mangoes. Mango IPA is a market that's been well done in the UK, but never done in Nigeria, even though most of the mangoes are coming from here. So
I have a mango IPA in the fridge upstairs, actually.
That could be your post podcast pint. Yeah. So there's a lot to do in terms of experimentation, and that'll be the fun part of the business.
Right.
Yeah. I think to add on to what Kevin's saying, for me personally, I think I call it the African Renaissance. It's a rebirth of Africa. And that for me is whether it's through the music, the art, the food, and for me it's more the beer. And I always say to people, we have people traveling to Africa to visit our continent, and then we take them to the game reserves. We show them our big five. We dance for them. We play them beautiful music, and then we give them food. But when it comes at the end, and they need to enjoy a drink with this meal, we give them Heineken that they know back from back home, or we give them a Budweiser, which they, you guys know it's your beer, but we don't have our own unique beer styles. We don't have our own unique ways of brewing. And I think through this call, we as Africans, we need to start developing our own uniqueness, something that makes us different from the rest of the brewers across the globe, something that will make us stand out, something that's going to make people want to come visit and taste our beers, or want our beers to be available in their shelves in across the globe. Because we've got, in South Africa, for example, we've got beers coming in from Germany, we've got beers coming from Belgium. We have all these beers coming from all over the world, but we're not exporting those beers. We're not sharing with the world what we're doing here. And for me, that's something I think we really need to focus on. And I think having these discussions and seeing that we are all we might be in different parts of the continent. We might be thousands of kilometers apart, but we are sort of thinking around the same line. And the more we collaborate, the more we talk about it, the more we get other people interested, I think we will definitely get to the point where craft brewing in Africa is like a novel. It's no longer an interesting thing. Everyone's doing it.
Well, that's pretty good place to leave, because, as I said, I'll be really interested to see what the American brewers are going to say when they're talking to the others tomorrow. Because just to let you know, the Chicago Brewseum and Black and Soul will be hosting the one with 3 American brewers, and it's going to be midnight my time, I think 1 o'clock in Pretoria and Kigali, so you probably won't watch it, but hopefully we'll see the replay. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what they, if they're taking the same influences, or where the influences they're taking from. Are they going to be cultural? Are they going to be ingredient wise, or the mixture of that? And so they'll be having that tonight. And hopefully they'll get to watch these 2 sessions as well, the one yesterday and the one today, because I think they're very interesting. And like I said, I learned a ton of stuff, so hopefully everyone else did as well. So maybe I'll just thank you, and maybe we can leave it there and let you get back to, I'm sure you have loads of work, Jesse. You're in pitch darkness, so we can't really, we'll have to let you go before it goes completely dark.
It's also storming here, so sorry. Our power just went out.
All right, listen, guys. Yeah, I think unless you have anything else specifically I should have asked, then I think it's probably a good place to stop and just say thanks very much for taking part. It was really enjoyed the 2 days. And say thank to Bayo as well. He was full of information yesterday as well. It was
Thank you.
great.
Thanks for having him. And
yeah.
thanks everyone.
Okay, listen, I'm just going to do with it in the old, I'm going to try and play the right video to go out tonight. And hopefully I'll have the replay of this up on the website, hopefully in the next couple of hours. If you want to tell everybody, I'll send you the link to it if you want to show anybody. And yeah, we'll be having the other one, like I said, tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Chicago time, which is early Tuesday morning for most of us. So we'll maybe get to watch the replay of that sometime. Okay, I'm going to play out this video and just say thanks again.
Thanks, guys.